There's a lot going on in China in this space, and China is committed to 5 big goals for achieving its climate change ambitions. It's got 60 goals of peak carbon in 2030 and carbon neutrality by 2060, the overarching climate goals in China. It's got the goals of increasing renewable energy capacity to 1,200 megawatts by 2030, and it's already achieved that goal in July this year, August this year. So there's grounds for optimism on that front. It's got the goal of increasing forest coverage by 6 billion cubic meters in 2030 on 2005, which I think are about 4.5 billion cubic meters. And it's got the goal of reducing carbon intensity by 65% by 2030. These are substantial and ambitious goals and commitments that China has made in its climate change path. And a lot is going on. Last year, the capacity of solar energy production in China was increased by as much as existed in the whole world in 2015, in 1 year. So again, there's grounds for optimism. But there's a lot still to do. Our panel today is going to help us understand where China is coming from on this and what the difficulties still are in the achievement of China's global China's climate goals. Our panel is joined online by Professor Wang Zhen at the Institute of Energy Economics in China's National Overseas Corporation from Beijing. Welcome, Professor Zhen. Here in Canberra, we have Xiaoli from the University of Petroleum, the School of Business Administration, University of Petroleum in Beijing. Jorrit Gosens from the Crawford School here, who's a specialist graduate from the Chinese Academy of Science, Environmental Sciences, and a specialist in energy transition in China. And David Stern, Professor of Economics here at the Crawford School as well. So let me turn to you first, Wang Zhen. You can hear us there, and ask you to give your assessment of where China is at with the achievement of its climate goals now and what the difficulties are in that ambition. Professor Zhao?
Okay. Thanks, Peter. Good morning. So it's my great honor to talk about the sciences on China. So we can see the China's achievements in the energy transition or energy transformation. So I believe the following 5 points are important. So the firstly, in the last several years, China energy construction continues to be optimized, especially the wind power and other clean energy sources reached almost 26.4% in the end of last year. So almost an increase of more than 10 percentage points compared to the 10 years ago, 2013. The second is the energy efficiency has improved a lot. Over the past decade, energy consumption per GDP has decreased by more than 23%. And thirdly, so the energy-related emissions beyond the CO2 emissions can be significantly reduced. So especially the pollutant emissions from the power sector can be reduced by more than 90%. And the intensity of the carbon emissions per hectare has fallen by nearly 35%, more than 1/3. So the fourth achievement, of course, on the renewable energy generation installations have increased significantly. The end of last year, the number of the installation of wind power and the PV generation had increased more than 10 times compared with the last years ago. And the installed capacity of clean energy power generation announced for 58% of the total installed capacity. So in other words, so the coal power capacity is less than 50%, only the 42%. In this August, so the China's installed wind and the PV capacity had already achieved the 2030 target set by the Chinese government, reaching a cumulative total 1.2 billion kilowatts. So the last achievement is the EVs are growing rapidly, especially this year with monthly penetration rates. In other words, the market share exceeding 50% continuous since July. Of course, so the China's energy transition has also generated significant global spillover effects. According to the primary study by my team, from the 2015 to 2023, China's exports of PV modules and the key parts to other countries contributed to reduce carbon emissions for more than 20 billion tons, and saving more than $10 billion. And exports of wind turbines and the key parts contribute to reduce carbon emissions for more than 3 billion tons, almost saving more than $1 billion. Of course, the Chinese develop very fast, but at the same time, China faces some of the challenges in realizing the carbon neutrality goal. I believe the following points the most important. So the first one, we know that China's industrial structure is still a heavy industry. China is still in the development stage of industrialization. The proportion of the heavy industry is relatively high with international partners. And the energy demand still grows regionally. So the last year's numbers, the industry accounted for nearly 1/3 of the GDP. The second is the Chinese energy consumption mix is still reliant on the coal and the fossil. The energy structure is still dominated by the fossil fuel, especially the coal consumption accounted for the mix of the 55%. It's higher than the world average of the 29 percentage points. So the third challenge is the total amount of emission is not. Currently, the world's largest energy producer and consumption is China. Of course, the energy-related carbon emission is bigger, almost accounting for 31.5% of the world. And the last emission, the last challenge is emission reduction is very steep. So from the carbon peak to the carbon neutral, the European Union has experienced about 70 years. The US and Japan would be more than 40 years, but China has only 30 years. So the carbon emission reduction process will be occur with a much steep slope. So the one more is on the challenge is the renewables consumption mechanism is not well established. So we will find in some areas, especially in the West China and the North China, so there are a lot of the renewables capacity, but cannot be well consumed. And in the South and East China, it needs more clean energy. But as you know, we know enough the renewables endowment. So how to establish a unified market, especially the energy market, that the more renewables can be consumed, will be the most important. This is my point, Peter.
Thanks very much, Wang. That's a fairly optimistic assessment of the rapidity with which China will move to carbon neutrality. Jorrit, how does that square with your thinking?
Yeah, so I think a number of things have been said already by the professor in China. Very clearly, progress in renewables and electric vehicles in China is moving at a pace that has surprised everyone, I think, and is really very substantially contributing. I think an important statistic to put it in an idea of scale is that up until a few years ago, in my lectures on developments in China, I would say about half of all solar panels and wind turbines globally is installed in China. Over the last 2 years, that was 2/3 of all solar panels and wind turbines. So that is how quickly China is moving. EVs, of course, the biggest market for that at the moment. In terms of hurdles, I think there's two things that really sort of are the most important on my shopping list, at least. One is a bit of a long-term emission strategy, which we've seen the goals of the 2030 peak emissions by 2030, zero emissions by 2060. Cynical observers have said that that means that they can grow their emissions for the next 5-6 years, and it doesn't really put a very clear trajectory towards 2060 just yet. That could be really helped by a proper plan from the government for emission strategy towards that goal that makes much clear how much the ambition is front-loaded, which sectors will have to run fastest, etc. Another thing that I think is quite crucially needed is a plan for closure of coal-fired power stations, so early closure of coal-fired power stations. Chinese have far too many of them. They're running at below 50% capacity, and that will only fall over the next decades. Some of them, hundreds of gigawatts just in the last few years that have opened. Those plants are never going to be able to run for their economic lifetime. They will be loss-making plants. I think in China, we need to have a good conversation about who will pick up the bill for that plan and how it's going to be paid for.
David, you've been watching the trends in China, carbon intensity reduction. How do you see what you observed, gelling with Jorrit and Zhen's observation.
So as we know, China committed to peaking in 2030. So there's been a lot of talk about whether that peak might happen earlier, even 24 to 25. So not seeing that yet, but anything can happen by 2030. So we published a paper last year, and we looked at what happened over the period of the pandemic in China, comparing 2019 to 2023, so the last year before the pandemic to the first year after, and saw that carbon dioxide emissions increased by about 10%, but almost all of that came from the electric power sector, where emissions increased about 18% over those 4 years. So what was happening was that there was a large increase in both wind and solar power, and small changes in hydro and nuclear, but there was an increase in fossil fuel generation as a generation source, not talking about capacity but actual use, about double, almost double the increase in wind and solar over that period. And when we looked at coal production, it increased very consistently at 6% a year. Over that period, a lot of that was replacing other imports of coal rather than being increasing consumption of coal. So then looking at this year, what's happening now in 2024, we've got the first 9 to 10 months of data from the Chinese government, as well as data from Carbon Monitor we use for the carbon emissions. And actually carbon emissions are down this year, a small amount. And